Today, from flipping burgers in mid-80s to flipping the narrative in tech, this is Confluent Developer.
I find myself in this world and I just felt like a complete idiot. I just missed all the boats that I could have caught. I don't know any of this stuff. I spent time in an actual data center in the middle of summer, wearing a coat, hands getting dry, cracking, bleeding. You gotta make it sound tough, right? I'd started going to some meetups and I'm like, I want to do that. And there's conferences I see happening. I want to go to those. I would love to speak at one of those. I had this drive to do that. Like, I want to get to the point where I can speak at a conference.
Hello there. I'm Viktor Gamov, and welcome to Confluent Developer, where we explore the fascinating journey of software developers tackling complex problems. In this episode, I'm interviewing my fellow co-host, Tim Berglund. From his humble beginnings as a Burger King broiler steamer in the mid-80s to becoming a prominent figure in the world of stream data, Tim shares a story of transformation. His early passion of coding, started at the age of 10, paved the way for his career in IT. You also will learn about the pivotal moments that led him to embrace the world of data and enterprise software. So, let's get to it. Today's episode, I'm extremely excited. I'm always extremely excited when I'm talking to my friend, Tim Berglund. For those of you who don't know him, he's also from Confluent. Tim, welcome to Confluent Developer.
Thanks for interviewing me today, Victor. This is going to be fun.
It's going to be fun, obviously. And I know you, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years now, maybe less, maybe more, but something about that. And it feels like I know you whole my life, at least my life is shorter than yours. But I never get a chance to ask you this question. Seriously, what was your actual first job?
Well, okay, it was the summer after ninth grade, which would make it, 86, 87, or something before ninth grade? It's mid-80s.
Couple years since my birthday, okay.
Yes. Burger King broiler steamer. So that's like the entry level. You get a job at Burger King. That's what they put you on, and it's where you take the frozen patties and stick them onto this little conveyor belt chain thing that passes them over the flame broiler, cooks them, and then you put them on the
so they do this on this conveyor belt, not on actual grill or...
Yeah, you're right. They're flame broiled, and there's a piece of equipment there that's making sure they all get flame broiled for the same amount of time, and a lot of... Anyway, absolutely hated it so much, as James Spader would say, worst summer of my life.
That's the Remington would say.
Yes, thank you.
Or Robert California.
Yeah, right. No, it's terrible. Hated it so much. As soon as school started, I had an excuse to quit. I'm like, nah, school's starting. Need to focus on school. Bye. I just really did not enjoy that.
And so you hate it so much, so you decide to focus on some other aspects. So the restaurant business and fast food chains didn't ring a bell for you, so you decide so I need to do something else with my life. Yeah,
right. And I'd already been writing software since I was 10, so I'd, a few years at the keyboard.
All right.
Basic and 8086 assembly language back then.
Okay. So basically, it's not like some serendipitous accident that brought you to world of IT and the world of software and world of data, right? So you already started this. It was intentional, right?
Oh yeah, I saw it and I knew it was there wasn't going to be any other thing I was going to do with my vocational life. I knew from the beginning.
That's incredible. That's actually hilarious. But seriously though, tell me about the hardest problems, like technical problem, software problem that you ever solved in your life. And, it's okay to tell if there was a problem that you didn't solve, but, we like to hear success stories. So ideally, that would be huge, epic things that you overcome and you did.
Yeah. That's a tough one. I don't know about huge, epic things.
Okay, what about not so huge, but still epic?
Yeah, but what's the biggest... So, you look at the recent 10, 15 years of my career, plenty of time coding, but I'm usually like mentoring, 15 years ago, mentoring teams getting started with some framework or something, or building demos. Early part of my career, I wrote firmware, and I remember, speaking of failures, one project in particular that was on an 8051. It's a microcontroller. If you
I have no idea what is that.
It's an 8-bit microcontroller that it's not a machine designed for compiled C code to work well, but the project was in C and it was a big mess, and I had to write this protocol to accomplish reliable transmission of data over an error-prone link. And actually failed. Didn't ever get it working. So that's a failure, but that's not. I don't want to deep dive into that.
It's probably there was no like a TCP/IP stack available. You got to reinvent the wheel and work like a very low level.
There was not. Yeah, but I think the best answer to your question. After that early season of my career where I was doing firmware, I pivoted into the web, and so I had 5-10 years of professional experience as a developer. The .com boom was happening, and I was kind of sitting back. And
it's what year it was, like roughly?
So that project was 95, 96, the failure. I started writing software professionally in 92. And then about 99, 2000, I came onto this project that was a web application. I don't even know if we said web application in 1999, but it was website that wasn't static content. There was some server-side component.
Yep.
It was in Java. There was an Oracle database. I didn't know anything about databases. This was all new stuff to me then. I made this pivot into this application, and I spent about the next 7 years of my life working for this little local startup that produced data and tools, search tools to access the data in the domain of the domain was passive electronic components.
Passive. It's a very, very specific domain.
Highly specific. Should I describe what that is?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
I'm always interested to learn about things that I have no idea. And the world of hardware for me is always fascinating, but I never get a chance to learn anything. So electronics in university, I kind of like skimmed this, somehow successfully passed this, but the software was always my goal. But now
your thing, yeah.
I am learning a lot of things about hardware, and I'm happy to get your perspective on this, since you spent more time there. Definitely have some stories to tell.
My degree was a computer engineering degree. So it's really mostly an electrical engineering degree with some of what I think are the more interesting EE classes cut out and a few software classes spliced in. That's really how it was. It was I almost think I should have just got a EE, would have been cooler. And most of what I learned about software, I learned on the job. Anyway, so I had plenty of hardware background. It had been a hobby, when I was a nerdy teenager. I wrote software. I did mess with some electronics, and so I knew this stuff. But passives refer to resistors, capacitors, and inductors. So if you've done the electronics chapter in undergraduate physics, you've probably gone over those. Maybe if you had that class in college, everybody's had some exposure there. That is in contrast to basically semiconductors. There are anything with transistors and then processors, memories, stuff like that. Those are not passives; those are actives or semiconductors. And here's the problem. Here's the why this business existed. If you look at this from a sales and distribution standpoint, that there's an electronics designer who designs a schematic and comes up with a parts list. And I do this stuff as a hobby now. Sometimes there's things like this that I build, and you pick all the components. Generally, the 90% of the cost in that bill of materials is going to be in semiconductors, processors, memories, USB controller, whatever. And all of those, that you just put the part number in there, and purchasing and distribution and all those people, they just know exactly what to get. For resistors, capacitors, inductors, they usually put a description. Like I want this kind of package and 2.2 kilo ohms, quarter watt, or whatever, something like that, but not a part number. And it's really hard to turn that into an actual
because
orderable
there's
part
different vendors for those type of parts.
There's different vendors, and there's the designer will probably specify like 3 properties of the component, and there's another 7 or 8 that you need to pick that the designer probably doesn't really care about. And if you kind of randomly pick them, you might come up with some strange part number that, it takes 6 months to order and you have to place a minimum order of 1 million parts or something. And if you make the right selections of those other parameters, then you get a thing that's in stock everywhere and super cheap. So there's this problem. The electronics world has this problem with passives, and the business had data and software to solve that. So that's the domain.
Okay, so you build this system that allows to pick this type of designs, or like with the kind of like select from in stock where and this type of stuff.
Right. What was so hard about this? I guess is the question. So the co-founders were domain experts, and one of them was the guy who could produce the data. So there was this big, fairly wide database of that was kind of data warehousey. I didn't really recognize that at the time because I was new to all this stuff.
Multiple columns of the
kind of sparse. Actually, it wasn't all that sparse. There weren't very many nulls, but it resembled more of an analytics kind of query than a transactional query, because you're filtering over. And this is what the predicates would be: low cardinality fields. Most of them. So, you might have 1 million rows in the database and you're selecting 200,000 with one of these. And so it looks like an analytics query.
It makes sense.
In terms of the execution. Yeah. So there's that data, and what people wanted was the ability, or the way customers would access this, for example, would be to go there and say, well, I need a 1 microfarad capacitor in a 0805 package with a 16 volt rating. Like, those are the 3 parameters I care about. And the software would then go figure out, okay, what's the best value for all these other things? Boop. Here's 5 part numbers for 5 different manufacturers that you're interested in.
And you can see the price, and you can see what's the in stock.
Actually, we didn't do that. So I'll get into that. So some of the, like what made this hard? Because right now it sounds like a fairly generic thing. But yeah, there were some complexities around the way the software was delivered. So I'll get to that. Anyway, so you got this thing where you're doing this sort of interesting analytics-y query over this data with some tools. Or you might say, okay, here's my part number. It's this manufacturer. What's the exact equivalent in this other manufacturer? And it would go and figure that out with all the things. For me, I was coming into this with very little knowledge of how all these technologies work. Didn't know databases well. It was like JSP 0.92 in the bad old days. No one had heard of MVC. Struts was a thing that came out 2 years later. So kind of wandering through this proto Java full stack web world where the tools were terrible.
Were crazy times. There was a crazy times, and there's a lot of, I would say, there was no much of the open source in the world at that time.
No, there wasn't. The initial production version of this website ran on JRun, Alaire, and later Macromedia, later Adobe, JRun, before Tomcat was really a viable option as a servlet container. Oracle, we paid for an Oracle license to run the Oracle database before MySQL became a viable production option.
The Oracle database in enterprise world, it's kind of like okay-ish. But you're naming the technologies that only very, very few might know or remember. The not many remember the name of Macromedia because it was acquired by Adobe now, and we wouldn't talk about those technologies anymore. But apparently there was a huge stack of technologies that might be used for enterprise web development.
Yeah, and it was on the one hand just early 2000s Java web development. It was a very difficult time. Every browser was IE6, or it didn't matter. This is pre-Firefox. But then, I guess I should say, what made this hard besides life just being sort of a pain back then, and
Yeah.
the tooling not being as good and everything. Well, again, I'm learning this new stack. I've got this, pretty well established career as a firmware developer, domain knowledge in telecom and all this stuff. And I find myself in this world, and I just felt like a complete idiot. Like I just missed all the boats that I could have caught. I don't know any of this stuff, and stumbling my way through it. And there were
very interesting. It's very interesting you saying this. Like that time, you already felt that you missing out big times, and you already missed the big wave. How those things just happen, and and now this is very very cyclic, and those things are constantly changing, and there's boats
constantly, and
every 5 years there's a new boat.
None of those technologies I was working with. I mean, Java, Java 1.2 back then. Java 5, I guess would be
maybe servlets somewhere.
And servlets, absolutely. The first version, literally appending strings together to create HTML. Before I even knew how Java beans worked, it was this process of just sort of stumbling your way through a new stack and feeling like a fish out of water. But there's a couple things we had to build. We had to build a site. So there was a public website. You could sign up and, probably stored the unencrypted passwords in a database at some point. I'm sure it was terrible for a little while. What are you? We're all friends here.
Right.
To demonstrate all these things, you could go build a part, you could cross-reference a part, you could look a part up, all these things. And we delivered that to customers as an API. So that's, here's a jar file, here's some examples.
That's the interesting part of delivering this thing, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And so lessons to learn there.
So do they need to have a copy of the data, or they actually will be talking to your web server through this
copy of the data? That nobody was really doing that kind of thing. The idea of like a web service call in 2000, 2001 would have been a little ahead of its time. So they had a copy of the data, and they had the distribution was a jar file, and it was really released both as a public website and as an API. And it was the things I got to learn. I got to kind of feel my way through what a relational database was. Remember, computer engineering major, didn't take databases in college.
Right.
What's that?
Yes.
Those are for the guys who can't hack it, as a arrogant young firmware developer, I used to think. And I built a team. I hired a couple of, they were new grads, straight out of a computer science program, and learned.
And they didn't teach Java at that time in the schools, right? So right now, computer science.
No, both of these guys had some Java in schools. They were pretty advanced, or up to date programs.
That's very interesting. That's very
yes. They had some Java preparation, but as you know, the stuff you learn in school and then the stuff you do at work. But these guys, I'll just use first names. Tim and Todd were their names, and they were such talented developers. We had a great team for a couple years there, and I learned how to some things about leadership, how to be an engineering manager, how to deal with my stakeholders. My bosses were very easy guys to work for. How to show up in customer meetings. There's just all of these skills that I'm building through this time while we're evolving the number of different types of products we cover, building features. Like, remember I said in a parts list, the whole problem with this whole business, the problem this business is solving is design engineers, the electrical engineers who are designing these circuits, will put some kind of garbage description of the part in the parts list. And it's meaningful to them. And any other designer who looks at it, like, everything you need to know. Okay, voltage rating, component value, packaging, I'm good, let's go. Maybe dielectric if it's a capacitor or something. But there isn't any standard way of writing that. And sometimes they do things like, well, this is a T451 tantalum capacitor. So I'll say T451 20 microfarads or something. Like, okay, what's T451 mean? That's some fragment of a part number. So you get this random trash in the parts list. Well, we wrote a product that parsed the random trash as like some very limited form of natural language, super primitive stuff.
Yeah.
And turned that into part number. So we're growing the kind of stuff we do, the number of customers we have, and eventually, I said I'd get into why we didn't know anything about stock. You said whether it was in stock, because generally at first that was customers were building that into their site. They had access to their inventory systems, but then we started to get into really a proper e-commerce system where you could place orders for these things, and we'd have some notion of inventory in various inventories we had access to. So that whole thing just grew. MVC happened. I remember waiting at Barnes & Noble for the first edition of the book on struts, the open source model view controller framework in Java. Refactored our whole application around this thing, life-changing. Later on, Spring MVC, all these things are just kind of happening in real time. And we're kind of keeping this business going with this evolving stack. And
the world of open source happened, and there's no kind of like a vendor lock-in. Now you start getting like a different open source servlet containers and like
Tomcat,
application servers.
Moved to Tomcat and moved to MySQL. That was really the choice back then. You wouldn't have picked Postgres at the time.
Yeah, Postgres was basically non-existent in terms of like user.
It existed, but in terms of adoption, it just
in terms of exactly user
not on
user
the
adoption
radar.
is
I
not.
think people got into the CLI and they were like /T. What? No.
Yeah.
No. I mean, it would be the default these days. But
yeah, I think that's where the people would start moving. Before the world of like web or like web scale exploded, and there's like lots of like websites that would use Stack,
exactly,
PHP, Apache, and MySQL.
As I like to tell this story when I'm doing my job now, and sometimes I tell the history of data.
Gather around, kids. I'll tell you the story of data,
of where data came from. Well, no, I'm starting this in about 1999, 2000, and I went up to 2007, 2008, which is about the launch of the iPhone. So this gets us up to the era where the tools that we had, and that the database technology I was working with, the application, all that stuff, it got us really up to the end of that era. Or the beginning of the end of that era, where scale started to happen to ordinary full stack developers like me, where those tools just didn't work. And things like the cloud was being born then. S3 and EC2 were brand new, and the way we build cloud native applications now, you just couldn't. Nobody was doing that back then. I couldn't have taken this and deployed it on 5 EC2 servers to scale out. That's just not how we built monoliths.
You need to probably rent some actual server.
I spent time in an actual data center in the middle of summer, wearing a coat, hands getting dry, cracking, bleeding. You got to make it sound tough, right?
Yeah.
But seriously, it's not good for your skin in there. But no, that was real. Real racked sheet metal servers. And again, it was an opportunity for me to grow as a developer, as a leader, and as we get to the end of that season, having helped that business along, a few years after I left, they had a successful exit. One of their customers, their big customers, bought them, and it was a great thing for everybody.
What would you say was the main? Obviously, since that time, you work on the different companies and, in GitHub and DataStax and Confluent again and other things. The companies that you hear, big companies, and you have an exciting career. But through this conversation, you decide to brought up like this particular, this particular part of your life. And what would you say it taught you? Like, what do you learn that help you kind of like propel your career, or not prepare, or maybe change something in your mindset, saying that, yes, this is something that I need to do or I should stop doing. Does it make sense what I'm asking?
Yeah. So by the end of that season, it was a good long run. It was like 7-8 years I was with this company. Great times, important relationships, really just a great thing. Number one, it took me out of the career I was in, the firmware world, and it put me in the world that we're in now. The broader world of the web and enterprise software and data. By the end of that period, honestly, I still felt like a little bit of a fish out of water, but I was there. That was my skill set. And it got me to a point where I felt like, I've learned what I can learn here, and there's something more I want. Like, I'd started going to some meetups, and I'm like, I want to do that. And there's conferences I see happening. I want to go to those. I would love to speak at one of those. I had this drive to do that. Like, I want to get to the point where I can speak at a conference. Whether I have anything interesting to talk about, we'll never know until we try. But my pivot then from there was to just break out on my own as an independent consultant, which gave me the freedom to experiment with things like that, like with meetups, with conferences, with training, developing a business around building curriculum and delivering it and really sharpening that muscle of teaching. And that pivot really is, there's this sort of inexorable march from there to developer relations, YouTube, all the things that are that characterize our work, yours and mine, Viktor, and the rest of the team here. You can really see that begin at the end of that gig, and it got me to the point where I saw that I wanted those things, and I had, by the way, from that point, I had years of engineering still ahead of me, but it was that time in the trenches as a person who is a developer and nothing else, and that's the key part of what formed me.
One last question before we wrap up, I think, is what advice, if you would meet yourself, back in the day, and you kind of like switching between careers, you kind of like, it turns out to be okay. It turns out to be a very good run, very good career, but probably you will have your doubts that time. You have your, concerns. What would you say to yourself, like, to convince that this is good way to pursue this? Don't worry about this. It's gonna be awesome.
Well,
just like very short, kind of just inspirational, because there's like, if you think about this, we can scale this to the point where many the modern developers on this type of road, and especially it's a super overwhelming even right now. It's not because we have the very limited amount of information. We have a plethora of different sources, plethora of different technologies, opinions, and all these kind of things. And people, young people, can feel super overwhelmed. And what would be your advice in this?
Yeah, I had this question a couple weeks ago, and I did back then. I felt so overwhelmed, and like I said, like a fish out of water. I had kind of cemented this firmware telecom identity in my 20s, and then spent my 30s not doing that, just doing web and enterprise IT things. And I felt like there's just so much about the world I don't know. I'm always bumping into new things I don't know, and man, do I know enough? Am I passionate enough about this? And if I could talk to young Tim, I've answered this question before, but just here for this audience, he was always going to figure it out. There isn't a thing he needed to know. There's not this one trick that would have unlocked anything. He was going to figure it out. If I could talk to him, I would just want him to know that I'm proud of him.
All right, folks, and now you have it. Tim, thank you so much for being part of Confluent Developer and tell us your story about this career path and some of the things that, not necessarily successful, something like incredibly overwhelming, and you still won and you build a career path that is, incredible and very, very interesting, full of not only technology. It's maybe the actual treasures, the people that we meet along the way. and experiences
to
that we getting from those people, and by building something together or breaking something together, the things that happen. You can listen this podcast everywhere where you can find us: YouTube, iTunes, and every place where the podcast feeds can be accessible. Give us thumbs up, rate us on your platforms, and always keep in touch. Let us know what you think. Let us know what kind of guests you want to have here on this podcast. And with this, my name is Viktor Gamov, and as always, have a nice day.